already told you, visiting hours are over. You need to clear the road now.
The funeral director's face went white when he saw what the old black man was holding. Not a medal, not an invitation, just a piece of twisted metal that looked like junk.
It's okay,
But when the
Elijah.
four-star general
You're
saw it,
safe now.
he stopped dead in his
We're gonna
tracks.
figure this out
His
together,
hand
all
snapped
right?
to his forehead so fast it made a sound. And then in front of 300 officers, politicians, and the media, he did something no one had ever seen before. What happened next at Arlington National Cemetery that morning would change military protocol forever. But first you need to understand why two young guards were dragging an 86-year-old veteran away in handcuffs, and why nobody tried to stop them. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Stay with us until the very end of this story. You won't believe how it unfolds. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this incredible story travels. Elijah Brooks had been awake since 3 in the morning. Not because he couldn't sleep. He'd stopped sleeping well in 1968. But today was different. Today he had to get it right. The dark suit laid out on his bed was 30 years old, pressed so many times the fabric had gone thin at the elbows. The shoes were polished until they caught the light. His hands shook as he tied the laces, not from age, though he was 86, but from something deeper. The envelope sat on his kitchen table, cream-colored, worn at the edges. Inside was a letter he'd written 17 times before throwing away 16 versions. "Dear David," it began. Just those 2 words had taken him 3 days. He picked up the envelope, set it down, picked it up again. The Washington, D.C. traffic was already building outside his small apartment window. Arlington National Cemetery was 45 minutes away. The funeral started at 10. He had no invitation. He went anyway. The cab driver kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Elijah stared out the window, watching the monuments pass. The Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument. Buildings full of marble and memory. None of them had his name on them. None of them ever would. "You going to a funeral, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes." "Someone close?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "He saved my life. I saved his. That's about as close as it gets." The driver didn't ask anything else. When they pulled up to the cemetery gates, Elijah saw the flags first. Hundreds of them. Then the people. Officers in dress uniforms, their chests covered in ribbons and medals. Civilians in expensive black suits. Camera crews. News vans. This wasn't just a funeral. This was a spectacle. General David Wallace had been important. 4-star general. Decorated veteran. Advisor to 3 presidents. His death had made national news. The funeral was invitation-only security, tighter than most government buildings. Elijah paid the cab driver and stepped out onto the curb. His legs were stiff. His back ached. But he stood straight the way he'd learned to stand 57 years ago in boot camp. The way he'd stood in the jungle when the mortars were falling, and standing was the only thing between you and becoming an animal. He walked toward the entrance. 2 guards stood at the gate. Young men. Couldn't have been more than 25. White kids with fresh haircuts and spotless uniforms. They had that look Elijah recognized immediately, the look of people who'd never been tested, who thought the uniform made them who they were. "Sir, this is a private ceremony," the first guard said. His name tag read Mitchell. "Invitation only." Elijah reached into his jacket pocket slowly. Not because he had to, but because he'd learned a long time ago that black men his age didn't make sudden movements around nervous white boys with authority. He pulled out the envelope. "I have something for the general," he said quietly. Mitchell didn't even look at it. "Sir, the general is deceased. This is his funeral. If you're here to pay respects, there will be a public memorial next month." "I know he's deceased," Elijah said. "That's why I'm here." The second guard porter stepped forward. He was bigger than Mitchell. Looked like he spent his off hours at the gym. "Sir, do you have an invitation, yes or no?" "No." "Then you need to leave." "I knew David Wallace," Elijah said. His voice was steady, but something in it made Porter pause. "I served with him, Vietnam. He'd want me here." Mitchell smirked. Actually smirked. "Sir, with all due respect, every veteran in the country thinks they knew the general. We've had 12 people try to get in without invitations already this morning." I'm not every veteran. You got any ID, military ID proof of service? Elijah slowly reached for his wallet. His fingers fumbled with it. Arthritis had gotten bad the last few years. He pulled out his driver's license, an old VA card so faded you could barely read it. Porter took them, glanced at them, handed them back. These don't prove you served with the general. I have the letter. A letter isn't an invitation, Mitchell said. Look, we understand you probably admired General Wallace. A lot of people did. But this is a military funeral with tight security. We have protocols. Behind them, a black limousine pulled up. A congressman Elijah recognized from television stepped out. The guards immediately straightened, saluted, waved him through. No one asked him for an invitation. Elijah felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger. Not yet. He'd felt this too many times to call it anger anymore. It was more like resignation, like being reminded of a truth you'd spent 50 years trying to forget. Please step aside, sir, Porter said. I just want to pay my respects. And we're telling you that's not possible. Now please move before we have to call over additional security. Elijah looked past them through the gates. He could see the crowd gathering, the flag-draped casket on the caisson, the honor guard standing at attention. Somewhere in that crowd was David Wallace's family, his widow, his children, his grandchildren. None of them knew Elijah's name. David had kept his promise about that. Listen, Elijah said, and his voice dropped lower. I understand you're doing your job. I respect that. But I'm asking you man to let me in, just for the service. I won't cause trouble. I just need to be there. Mitchell shook his head. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave voluntarily. I can't do that. Porter's hand went to his radio. We have a situation at the main gate. Uncooperative civilian refusing to leave. That's when Elijah noticed it. The way they said civilian. The way they looked at him, not as a veteran, not as a man who'd served, but as a problem to be removed. He was invisible to them. He'd been invisible his whole life. Check my record, Elijah said. Military database, Elijah Brooks. I served. I was there. Sir, even if that's true, it doesn't give you access to this funeral. Now step back or we will detain you. Detain me? You're disrupting a military funeral. I'm standing here talking to you. Porter's jaw set. Sir, final warning. Elijah didn't move. He'd spent 57 years moving when white men told him to move, standing aside when they told him to stand aside, making himself small when they needed him to disappear. Not today. Porter grabbed his arm. Elijah jerked back instinctively, not to fight, just to pull away, and that's when Mitchell grabbed the other arm. They weren't gentle about it. His shoulder screamed with pain, old injuries from the war that never quite healed. Don't resist, Porter barked. I'm not resisting. But they were already forcing him backward away from the gates. His feet stumbled. His old legs couldn't keep up with their young strength. People were starting to stare. Officers in uniform, families in funeral black, all watching the old black man being dragged away. Elijah's suit jacket bunched up. The envelope fell from his pocket onto the pavement. He tried to reach for it, but Mitchell twisted his arm behind his back. Please, Elijah said. The letter. You can pick it up when we're done here, Porter said. They pulled him toward a security station near the gate. Small building, white walls, American flag hanging limp in the morning air. Elijah's heart was hammering now, not from fear, from humiliation, from the weight of every time this had happened before. What's going on here? The voice came from behind them, young, uncertain. Mitchell and Porter stopped. A black officer stood there, couldn't have been more than 30. Captain's bars on his shoulders. His name tag read, Hayes. Sir, we have an unauthorized person attempting to access the funeral, Porter said. We're removing him from the premises. Captain Hayes looked at Elijah, really looked at him. His eyes went to the thin suit, the polished shoes, the way Elijah stood even now, even being held by two guards back straight, chin up. Did he threaten anyone? Hayes asked. No, sir, but did he attempt to breach security? He refused to leave when instructed, sir. Hayes stepped closer. What's your name, sir? Elijah met his eyes. Elijah Brooks. Did you serve Mr. Brooks? Yes. What unit? I was a medic, attached to different units as needed. Vietnam. Hayes's expression shifted slightly. You have proof of service. VA card in my wallet. They took it. Hayes held out his hand to Mitchell. Let me see it. Mitchell reluctantly handed over Elijah's wallet. Hayes pulled out the card, examined it. His brow furrowed. He looked at Elijah again, then back at the card. This doesn't have much information, Hayes said carefully. No, Elijah said. It wouldn't. There was something in the way he said it, something that made Hayes pause. Did you know General Wallace? Hayes asked. Yes. How? Elijah's throat tightened. I can't tell you that. Can't or won't. Both. Mitchell made a disgusted sound. See, he's lying. Probably saw the funeral on the news and wanted attention. But Hayes wasn't looking at Mitchell. He was looking at Elijah's lapel, at a small pin there barely noticeable. Just a piece of dull, twisted metal. It didn't look like any military decoration Hayes had ever seen. What's that? Hayes asked, pointing. Elijah's hand instinctively went to it, protected it. It's nothing, just something I kept. Looks like shrapnel. It is. From Vietnam. Elijah nodded slowly. Hayes stared at it. Something was clicking in his mind. He'd heard stories. Old stories from his grandfather who'd served in Vietnam. Stories about medics who operated outside normal channels. Men who had no official records because what they did was never officially supposed to happen. Let him go, Hayes said quietly. Sir, Porter said. I said let him go. Captain, with all due respect, we have our orders. And I'm giving you a new order. Release him. Mitchell and Porter exchanged glances but let go of Elijah's arms. Elijah stumbled slightly, caught himself. His shoulder was screaming. He bent down slowly, painfully, and picked up the envelope from the pavement. Hayes watched him. Mr. Brooks, I need to make a phone call. Can you wait here for a moment? Am I under arrest? No, sir. I just need to verify something. Elijah looked at the gates, at the funeral service that was about to start without him. How long? 5 minutes, please. There was something in Hayes's voice, not pity, not suspicion. Something else. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. Elijah nodded. Hayes walked away, pulling out his cell phone. Mitchell and Porter stood there awkwardly, still watching Elijah like he might bolt for the gates. You got a lot of nerve, Mitchell muttered. Coming here without an invitation, making a scene. Elijah didn't respond. You know how many fake veterans we deal with. People claiming they served, looking for attention. I'm not fake, Elijah said quietly. Sure you're not. Porter stepped closer. What's really in that envelope? What's so important you're willing to get arrested over it? Elijah looked down at the cream-colored paper in his hands, worn at the edges, stained with coffee from where he'd gripped it too hard this morning. A goodbye, he said simply. 20 feet away, Hayes was on his phone. His voice was low, urgent. Elijah couldn't hear what he was saying, but he saw Hayes's body language change, saw him straighten, saw his eyes go wide. Hayes turned, stared at Elijah. Then he made another call. This one lasted longer. Mitchell checked his watch. Service is about to start. We need to clear this area. Hayes said to wait, Porter said. Hayes doesn't have jurisdiction over gate security. That's our call. They were about to grab Elijah again when Hayes came jogging back. His face was flushed. His phone was still in his hand. Don't touch him, Hayes said. His voice was sharp now, commanding. Captain, we really need to... I said don't touch him. Hayes looked at Elijah. Mr. Brooks, I need you to stay right here. Do not leave. Understand? What's happening? Elijah asked. Just, please, stay here. Hayes was looking toward the main road, waiting for something. In the distance, Elijah heard sirens. Not police sirens. Military sirens. 3 black Suburbans came racing up the road toward the cemetery, flags flying from their hoods. They moved fast, cutting through traffic, other cars pulling over to let them pass. Holy shit, Porter whispered. The Suburbans screeched to a stop at the gate. Doors flew open, and out stepped a man who made everyone within 50 feet straighten to attention. 4 stars on his shoulders, ribbons covering his chest. hair gray face lined with age and command. He had to be in his 70s, but he moved like a man 30 years younger. General Michael Peters. Elijah had never met him, but he knew who he was. Everyone who'd ever worn a uniform knew who he was. This was a man who'd served in 3 wars, who'd commanded entire theaters, who had the ear of presidents and the respect of every soldier in the armed forces. Peters strode toward them, and the crowd that had been gathering for the funeral parted like he was Moses at the Red Sea. He walked straight past Hayes, past Mitchell and Porter, who both saluted so rigidly they looked like statues. He walked straight to Elijah. And then before Elijah could even process what was happening, General Michael Peters came to attention and snapped the sharpest, most precise salute Elijah had ever seen. "Mr. Brooks," Peters said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "It is an honor, sir." Elijah stood there frozen. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say. Peters held the salute. Behind him, every officer in sight was scrambling to figure out what was happening. Who was this old black man in the threadbare suit? Why was a 4-star general saluting him? General. Elijah finally managed. I'm not. "You are exactly who you are," Peters said, "and that is why I'm standing here." He lowered his salute, but didn't step back. His eyes locked onto Elijah's with an intensity that was almost physical. "Do you know what day it is?" Peters asked. "Monday, November 3rd. "Do you know what else it is?" Elijah shook his head. "It's the 57th anniversary of Operation Shepherd." The air went out of Elijah's lungs. He hadn't heard that name in 57 years. Peters turned to face the crowd. More people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Officers, civilians, the press cameras already rolling. "Most of you don't know that name," Peters said, his voice carrying. "It's not in any official records. It's not in any history books. The operation was classified then and remains classified now. But the men who were there, the 11 men who came home when they shouldn't have, they know." Mitchell and Porter were pale. They'd stepped back, suddenly realizing they'd made a terrible mistake. In November 1968, Peters continued, a platoon was ambushed in the Quang Tri province. Enemy fire. Surrounded. Cut off from support. 11 men wounded. 3 critically. By every strategic calculation, they were dead. Command had written them off. We'd already drafted the letters to their families. Elijah closed his eyes. He could feel it coming back. The heat. The screams. The wet sound of blood hitting mud. "But there was a medic," Peters said. "A man who'd been attached to the unit only 3 days before. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't officially assigned. But when the shooting started, he did something no one thought was possible." The crowd was silent now. Even the reporters had stopped talking. He carried 11 men out of that jungle, one by one, through enemy territory, under fire. He was hit twice, kept going, lost half his blood, kept going. It took him 19 hours. 19 hours of carrying broken men through hell. Peters turned back to Elijah. One of those men was a captain named David Wallace. Someone in the crowd gasped. The medic refused a medal, refused recognition, refused to have his name put in any official report. He said he was just doing his job. Command tried to give him the Medal of Honor. He turned it down, said it would draw too much attention, said he had other men to get back to. Peters stepped closer to Elijah. So, Captain Wallace, Lieutenant Wallace, at the time gave him something else. Something personal. A piece of the shrapnel that would have killed him if this man hadn't been there. Peters' eyes dropped to Elijah's lapel, to the small, twisted piece of metal. He told the medic to keep it, said it was worth more than any medal the army could give. Elijah's hands were shaking, not from age now, from memory, from the weight of 57 years of silence. And for 57 years, Peters said, this man kept that promise. He never told anyone what he did. He never asked for recognition. He faded into history like smoke. The men he saved went on to have careers, families, lives. David Wallace became a general, led thousands of soldiers, advised presidents, and every year on November 3rd he would make a phone call to a man named Elijah Brooks and say 2 words, "Thank you, Shepherd." The crowd was transfixed. Peters looked at Mitchell and Porter. "You two just tried to arrest the man who gave us General David Wallace, the man who gave 11 families their sons back, the man who embodied every value we claim to stand for." Mitchell looked like he might throw up. He started. "Sir, we didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Peters snapped, "because you didn't ask. You saw an old black man without an invitation and assumed he didn't belong. You didn't see the suit he pressed this morning. You didn't see the shoes he polished. You didn't see the respect he was showing just by being here. You saw what you expected to see." Peters turned back to the crowd. "Elijah Brooks is the man General Wallace talked about when he thought no one was listening. He's the reason David lived long enough to become the man we're burying today. And if anyone here has a problem with him attending this funeral, you can take it up with me." No one spoke. No one moved. Peters held out his arm to Elijah. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "would you walk with me?" Elijah looked at the arm, at the 4 stars, at the man who'd just exposed a secret Elijah had kept for more than half a century. "I don't want to cause trouble," Elijah said. "You're not causing trouble. You're reminding us what honor looks like." Elijah took the general's arm. Together they walked through the gates of Arlington National Cemetery. Behind them the crowd parted. Officers saluted. Some had tears in their eyes. The press followed at a respectful distance, cameras rolling, capturing the image that would be on every news channel by evening, a 4-star general walking arm in arm with an elderly black veteran in a threadbare suit. Captain Hayes watched them go. He was shaking, not from fear, from awe. He looked at Mitchell and Porter. "You two," he said quietly, "just learned the most important lesson of your careers. I suggest you remember it." As Peters and Elijah walked toward the funeral service, Peters leaned in close. "David left something for you," he said. "An envelope. He made me promise that if you came today, I'd make sure you got it. He knew I'd come. He hoped you would. He also knew you'd probably get stopped at the gate. That's why he made sure I knew what to look for. The shrapnel. The shrapnel." Peters smiled slightly. "He said you'd never take it off. Said it mattered more to you than it did to him." They reached the front row of seats. The widow Sarah Wallace was sitting there, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She looked up as they approached. Peters spoke softly to her. Sarah's eyes went wide. She stood, looked at Elijah, and burst into tears. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Oh my God. You came." She embraced him, and Elijah stood there stiffly, not knowing what to do. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to being seen. "He talked about you every November 3rd, Sarah said through her tears. "Every year. He'd call you, and then he'd tell me the same story. About the medic who wouldn't leave anyone behind. About the man who saved his life." "I just did what needed doing," Elijah said quietly. "You did more than that. You gave me 57 years with him. You gave my children their father, my grandchildren their grandfather." She pulled back, held his face in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Peters guided Elijah to a seat in the front row, right next to the family, right where he should have been all along. As the service began, Elijah sat there in silence, holding the envelope he'd brought, the letter he'd written, the goodbye he'd come to say. And in his other hand, Sarah Wallace pressed something small and cool. He looked down. It was an envelope, cream-colored, worn at the edges, his name written on it in David Wallace's handwriting. The funeral proceeded with military precision. The honor guard, the gun salute, the flag folded with ceremony and presented to Sarah. But Elijah barely heard any of it. He was staring at the envelope in his hand. When the service ended and people began to disperse, Peters appeared at his side again. "There's a repast at the family's home," Peters said. "You're invited." "I should go," Elijah said. "I've caused enough, Mr. Brooks." Peter's voice was gentle but firm. "You haven't caused anything except people to remember what matters. Please stay." Elijah looked at the envelope again. "Can I have a minute?" he asked. "Alone." Peters nodded and stepped away. Elijah walked slowly through the cemetery past rows of white headstones until he found a bench under an old oak tree. He sat down carefully, his old body aching. He opened David's envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky. David had written this recently, probably when he knew the end was coming. "Elijah," it began. "If you're reading this, it means two things. First, I'm gone. Second, you kept your promise about coming to say goodbye, even though I know how much you hate funerals. I've thought a lot about what to write to you. There's so much I want to say. Thank you seems inadequate. You saved my life that day in the jungle, but that's not the half of it. You taught me what it means to serve, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it's right. I went on to have a career, a family, a life I never would have had without you. And every day, every single day, I thought about you, about what you sacrificed, about the fact that you never asked for anything in return. I tried, Elijah. I tried so many times to get you recognized, to get your story told. But you wouldn't let me. You said the work mattered more than the credit. You said heroes don't need medals. They need other people to step up. So I made you a promise instead. I promised I'd live the life you gave me in a way that honored what you did. I hope I kept that promise. I'm sorry I couldn't tell the world about you while I was alive. But I've left instructions. General Peters knows everything. He'll make sure your story is told, not to embarrass you, but to teach. The Army needs to know that character isn't about rank or ribbons. It's about who you are when no one's watching. There's one more thing. The family plot has room for one more. I've already paid for it. It's yours if you want it. No pressure. But the idea of having you nearby even in death gives me comfort. You were my brother Elijah, not by blood, but by something stronger. Take care of yourself. And if you see any young soldiers who look like they're losing their way, remind them what service really means. Your friend always, David. Elijah read the letter 3 times. Then he carefully folded it, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in his jacket pocket, next to the letter he'd written but never delivered. He sat there for a long time watching the flags ripple in the November wind. Eventually, Peters came to find him. "The family's asking for you," Peters said. Elijah stood slowly. His legs were stiff. His shoulders still ached where the guards had grabbed him. "General," he said, "what happens now?" Peters looked at him seriously. "What do you mean?" "The story. You told everyone. That wasn't supposed to happen. David wanted it told." "David wanted a lot of things." Peters nodded. "You're right. He did. And one of them was making sure people like those guards at the gate learned to see past their assumptions. Learn to recognize honor when it's standing right in front of them. You can't teach that in a day." "No," Peters agreed. "But you can start." He paused. David left something else. A request. He wanted a new protocol implemented across all military installations. Training for all personnel about recognizing service that doesn't fit the standard narrative. About treating every veteran regardless of how they look or whether they have an invitation with basic human dignity. Elijah's throat tightened. He shouldn't have done that. Why not? Because I'm not special. I just did what anyone would have done. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Brooks. Most people wouldn't have done what you did. Most people would have saved themselves. You saved 11 men who weren't even in your unit. You risked everything for strangers. They stopped being strangers the moment the shooting started. Peter smiled. That right there, that's what we need to teach. They walked back toward the parking area. The crowd had thinned, but people still stopped to stare at Elijah. Some nodded respectfully, others whispered. Mitchell and Porter were standing near the gate. When they saw Elijah and Peters approaching, they both came to rigid attention. At ease, Peters said. They relaxed slightly but still looked terrified. Peters looked at them for a long moment. You two made a mistake today, he said. A bad one. You judged a man by his appearance instead of his character. You used your authority to humiliate someone who deserved your respect. Sir, Mitchell said, his voice cracking. We're sorry. We didn't. I know what you didn't know. The question is what you're going to do with what you know now. Both guards looked confused. Peters turned to Elijah. Mr. Brooks, these men assaulted you, wrongfully detained you, prevented you from attending a funeral you had every right to attend. You could file charges. You could ruin their careers. What would you like to do? Elijah looked at Mitchell and Porter. They were just kids, really. Scared kids who'd been given a uniform and a little bit of power and told to protect something they didn't fully understand. Nothing, Elijah said quietly. Nothing. Peters raised an eyebrow. They were doing their job the only way they knew how. They made a mistake. We all make mistakes. Mr. Brooks, with respect, this was more than a mistake. General. Elijah's voice was soft but firm. These boys will remember today for the rest of their lives. That's punishment enough. What they need now isn't to be destroyed. They need to be taught. Peters studied him, then nodded slowly. You're a better man than most, Mr. Brooks. No, sir. I'm just old enough to know that breaking people doesn't fix them. He turned to Mitchell and Porter. You want to make this right? Elijah asked. They both nodded frantically. Then learn from it. Next time you see someone who doesn't fit your idea of what they should be, look closer. Ask questions. Treat them like they might have a story worth hearing, because everyone does. Mitchell's eyes were red. Mr. Brooks, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just do better. Elijah turned and walked away, Peters beside him. Behind them, both guards saluted. Elijah didn't see it, but Peters did, and he nodded approvingly. As they reached the parking area, a reporter broke through the cordon and approached with a camera crew. Mr. Brooks, can we ask you a few questions? Peters stepped between them. Mr. Brooks isn't giving interviews. But the public deserves to know. The public deserves to respect this man's privacy. He came here to mourn a friend, not to become a story. The reporter persisted. Is it true you saved General Wallace's life in Vietnam? Is it true you were never officially recognized? Elijah stopped walking. He turned slowly. Recognition isn't why you serve, he said simply. You serve because people need help. Everything else is just noise. He got into one of the Suburbans before the reporter could ask anything else. Peter slid in beside him. You're good at that, Peter said. At what? Saying exactly what needs to be said and nothing more. Elijah shrugged. Had a lot of practice being quiet. They drove to the Wallace family home in silence. It was a beautiful house in Georgetown, 3 stories, brick facade, the kind of place Elijah had only ever seen from the outside. Sarah met them at the door. Please, she said, taking Elijah's hand. Come in. Everyone wants to meet you. Inside the house was filled with people, officers in uniform, civilians in black, the murmur of polite conversation and clinking glasses. But when Elijah stepped through the door, the murmur died. Everyone turned to look. Sarah kept hold of his hand, guiding him through the crowd like he was something precious that might break. People parted as they passed. Some stared openly. Others whispered behind their hands. Elijah felt his chest tightening. This was what he'd spent 57 years avoiding. The attention, the questions, the weight of other people's curiosity pressing down on him. Sarah, he said quietly. Maybe I should. You should meet David's children, she said firmly. They've been waiting their whole lives for this. She led him to a group standing near the fireplace. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all in their 50s. They had David's eyes, David's jawline. The oldest son stepped forward first. Mr. Brooks, he said, and his voice cracked. I'm Michael, David Jr. He held out his hand. Elijah shook it. My father talked about you, Michael said. Not often, but when he did, it was like he was talking about something sacred, something he couldn't quite put into words. Your father was a good man, Elijah said, because you gave him the chance to be. The daughter stepped forward next. I'm Rebecca, And this is Thomas. She gestured to the younger son. We need to know something. Why did you never come forward? Why did you let everyone think the story was just a legend? Elijah looked at them, three successful, educated people who'd grown up with every advantage he'd never had. How could he explain it to them? How could he make them understand that for a black medic in 1968, being invisible was the only way to survive? Your father asked me not to, Elijah said simply. But why would he do that? Thomas asked. You deserved recognition. I deserved to go home alive, Elijah interrupted. That's what your father gave me. He protected my name, kept me out of the official reports, made sure I could fade back into the world without anyone asking questions I couldn't answer. Rebecca frowned. What kind of questions? Elijah hesitated. This was the part he'd never told anyone. The part that made his hands shake when he thought about it too long. The kind that get people killed, he said quietly. The room had gone silent again. Everyone was listening now, even pretending not to. General Peters appeared at Elijah's elbow. Perhaps we should give Mr. Brooks some space. This is a lot for one day. But Sarah shook her head. No. David wanted this. He wanted people to know. Not just the surface story, but the real one. She looked at Elijah with an intensity that reminded him of David. That same determination. That same refusal to look away from hard truths. Tell them, Sarah said. Please. Whatever you've been carrying all these years, they need to hear it. Elijah's throat went dry. He looked around the room at all these faces, military brass politicians, people with power and position, and realized that none of them understood. None of them knew what it had really been like. I wasn't supposed to be there, Elijah said finally. His voice was low, but in the silent room everyone heard. In that jungle, with that platoon, I wasn't assigned to them. I was attached to a different unit 50 miles south. Then how did you end up with my father's platoon? Michael asked. Because 3 days before the ambush, I killed a man. The words fell like stones into still water. Sarah's hand tightened on his arm, but she didn't let go. He was a lieutenant, Elijah continued. White, from South Carolina. He didn't like that I'd been assigned to his unit. Didn't like taking orders from any medic, but especially not from a black one. He made that clear from day one. Elijah could see it again. The lieutenant's face red with anger and contempt. The way he'd spit when he talked like the words themselves were poison he needed to get out. We were on patrol, routine sweep, but nothing was ever really routine over there. We walked into an ambush, small one, just a few VC fighters. Everyone hit the ground except one kid, 19 years old, fresh out of Georgia. He froze. The lieutenant was closest to him, could have pulled him down. Instead, he stayed behind cover and screamed at the kid to move. But the kid couldn't move. He was locked up with fear, and the VC were zeroing in. Elijah's hands clenched into fists. I ran out and grabbed the kid, dragged him back, got him safe. But when I got back to cover, the lieutenant got in my face, started screaming about how I'd disobeyed orders, how I'd broken protocol, how I'd exposed the unit. What happened? Rebecca whispered. I told him to go to hell. A few people in the room gasped. You didn't talk to officers like that. Not in 1968. Not if you wanted to stay alive. He hit me, Elijah said. Knocked me down in front of the whole unit. Called me things I won't repeat. Said he'd have me court-martialed. Said he'd make sure I never worked as a medic again. And then, Thomas asked, and then I got up and I hit him back. The room was frozen. Even Peters looked shocked. I didn't plan it, Elijah said. It just happened. He came at me again and I put him down. One punch, broke his jaw. He went out cold. Jesus, Michael breathed. The whole unit saw it. Enlisted men, NCOs, everyone. I knew what that meant. Assaulting an officer. I'd be lucky if they didn't shoot me themselves. So I made a choice. I ran. You deserted? Peters asked carefully. I disappeared, grabbed my medical kit, and just walked into the jungle. Figured I'd rather take my chances with the VC than with a court-martial that would end with me in prison, or worse. Sarah's eyes were glistening. David never told me this part. Because David promised he wouldn't. But I think he'd want you to know now. Want everyone to know what really happened." Elijah took a breath. This was the hardest part. The part he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it was just a nightmare. I walked for 3 days, lived off the land, avoided patrols, ours and theirs. I was trying to get to a fire base where no one knew me. Figured I could attach to a new unit, use a different name, just disappear into the system. But on the 3rd day, I heard gunfire, a lot of it. And I heard something else, men screaming for a medic. His voice dropped. I should have kept walking. I was AWOL. I had no authority to be there, but I couldn't. Those were American voices screaming, so I ran toward the sound. "That's when you found my father's platoon," Michael said. "They were trapped, pinned down in a clearing with no cover. I counted 11 men still alive, most of them hit. The VC had them surrounded on 3 sides. It was a slaughter." Rebecca's hand went to her mouth. "I crawled in from the east side. No one saw me at first. I got to the first wounded man kid with half his leg blown off and started working on him. One of the soldiers finally noticed me, started to say something. I told him to shut up and get me to the next casualty." "Did they know you weren't part of their unit?" Peters asked. "Not at first. They were too busy dying to ask questions. But your father—" Elijah looked at Sarah. David knew. He was conscious even with shrapnel in his chest. He looked at me and he said, "You're not one of mine." And I said, "Does it matter?" And he said, "No, but thank you." That's when I knew I couldn't leave any of them. Couldn't save some and abandon others. So I made a plan. Told the men who could still fight to lay down cover fire in intervals. Every time they fired, I'd drag one wounded man back toward the tree line, one at a time. Slowest rescue operation in history. 19 hours, Peters said quietly. 19 hours, Elijah confirmed. Got shot twice. Once in the shoulder, once in the side. Kept going. Had to. Because every man I left behind was one more mother who'd get a flag instead of her son. Thomas was crying openly now. And my father was one of those men. He was the 4th one I carried out. By then I was losing blood fast, couldn't feel my left arm. David kept telling me to leave him. Said I'd done enough, but I couldn't. He was still alive. That meant he got out. When it was over, when I'd gotten all 11 men to a safe position and called in an extraction, David grabbed my arm. He was barely conscious. He pulled out this piece of shrapnel from his chest pocket, the one that had almost killed him. He pressed it into my hand and said, "Keep this. No matter what happens, keep this. It's worth more than any medal." Elijah touched the pin on his lapel, the same piece of shrapnel worn smooth by 57 years of being carried. The extraction came. Medevac choppers. They took the wounded first. David went out on the second bird. As they were loading him, he looked at me and said one word, "Disappear." "He knew you were AWOL," Peters said. "He figured it out. He was smart like that. And he knew that if I went back with them, questions would be asked. My name would go in a report. The unit I'd deserted from would find out where I was. So he gave me a gift. He let me vanish." "But how?" Rebecca asked. "How did you just disappear?" David filed his report. Said the rescue was carried out by an unnamed medic who'd been killed in the final extraction. Said the body was unrecoverable. Command didn't question it. They were just happy 11 men had survived when they'd expected 0. And I walked back into the jungle and stayed there for another week until I found a unit that needed a medic and didn't ask too many questions. "You served under a false identity?" Peters asked. "I served under my own name, but attached to different units every few weeks. Never staying long enough for anyone to check my file. Never doing anything that would make me stand out, just doing the work. Saving who I could save. And when the war ended, I came home and disappeared for real." Sarah was openly crying now. "David looked for you. After the war, he tried to find you." "I know. He told me. That's why I made sure I was hard to find." "But you stayed in touch," Michael said. "Once a year, November 3rd, he'd call. We'd talk for a few minutes, and then we'd go back to our separate lives." "Why did you agree to that?" Thomas asked. "Why let him honor you once a year but never anything more?" Elijah looked at him directly. "Because your father understood something most people don't. Heroes aren't heroes because they want credit. They're heroes because they do what needs doing when no one else will. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the story go untold. A voice came from the back of the room. But the story should have been told. Everyone turned. A man in his 70s stepped forward. He was thin, bent with age, but his eyes were sharp. He wore a simple dark suit, but on his lapel was a small pin. Not military. Something else. "Who are you?" Peters asked. "James Morrison. I was one of the 11. Elijah's breath caught. He hadn't seen James Morrison in 57 years. James walked across the room slowly. He moved like a man whose body had betrayed him long ago, but whose will kept him upright anyway. He stopped in front of Elijah. "You don't remember me," James said. "I wouldn't expect you to. I was unconscious for most of it. Sucking chest wound. You sealed it with a plastic wrapper from a ration pack in your bare hand." "Morrison," Elijah said quietly, the memory coming back. "You were the first one. The one furthest from the tree line. I died twice that day. You brought me back both times. And when they loaded me on the medevac, I remember seeing you standing there covered in blood. Most of it not yours, and I thought you were an angel. Literally, I thought I was already dead, and angels had come to carry me home." "You weren't dead," Elijah said. "No, but I should have been." "We all should have been." James looked around the room. "I've spent 57 years wondering what happened to the medic who saved us. David would never tell me. Said it was classified. Said the medic wanted it that way. I assumed you'd died. Assumed you'd been killed in some other firefight, and we'd just never heard." "I'm sorry," Elijah said. "Don't be sorry. Be proud. Do you know what you did? Do you understand the lives you changed? I did my job." "Your job." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your job was to stabilize casualties for evacuation. Your job was to follow orders. Your job was not to carry 11 men through 19 hours of hell while bleeding out yourself." He turned to address the room. "I went on to have a family, 3 kids, 7 grandchildren. I taught high school history for 35 years. I coached Little League. I volunteered at a food bank. I lived a full life, and none of it would have happened without this man." Other people were nodding now, crying, understanding what they were hearing. "But here's what kills me," James continued, his voice rising. "Here's what keeps me up at night even now. This man saved 11 lives that day. 11 men went home to their families because of him, and for 57 years he's been invisible. No medal, no recognition, no one even knew his name." "That's not entirely true," Peters interjected. "David knew, and David made sure that certain people in the military knew. We couldn't make it official, but we knew." "Knowing isn't enough." James's voice cracked. "This man deserves better than whispers and shadows. What he deserves," Sarah said firmly, "is what David wanted for him. Peace, privacy, and the knowledge that he made a difference." She looked at Elijah. "That's right, isn't it? That's what David was trying to give you all these years." Elijah nodded slowly. His throat was too tight to speak. "But David also left instructions," Sarah continued. "He wanted the story told not to embarrass you or force you into the spotlight, but to teach. He believed that your example could change how people think about service and sacrifice." "How?" Elijah managed. Sarah pulled an envelope from her pocket. Different from the one David had left for Elijah. This one was sealed with the Wallace family crest. "He called it the Brooks Protocol," she said. "A complete overhaul of how military personnel are trained to recognize and honor veterans, especially veterans who don't fit the expected profile." Peters nodded. "I've seen it. David spent the last 2 years of his life working on it. It's comprehensive. It covers everything from gate security to VA hospitals to public memorials. The goal is to make sure what happened to you this morning never happens to another veteran again." "That's impossible," Elijah said. "Maybe, but we're going to try anyway." Sarah handed him the envelope. "He wanted you to read this, wanted you to understand what he was trying to do." Elijah took it, but didn't open it. Not here. Not in front of all these people. A young woman appeared at the edge of the room, early 20s, black, wearing a military uniform with second lieutenant bars. She'd been standing in the back, listening to everything. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Mr. Brooks. Everyone turned to look at her. I'm Lieutenant Taylor Morrison, James Morrison's granddaughter. James's face lit up. Tay, come here, honey. She walked over, stood between her grandfather and Elijah. Up close, Elijah could see she had her grandfather's eyes, sharp and determined. I joined the army because of a story my grandfather told me when I was 10 years old, she said, about a medic who saved his life in Vietnam, about a man who did the impossible because it was right. I've been carrying that story with me through basic training, through officer school, through every hard day when I wanted to quit. Her voice wavered. And now I find out that man is real, that he's here, that I'm standing next to him. You should quit, Elijah said suddenly. Everyone froze. Sir, Taylor said, shocked. The military isn't what you think it is. It's not all heroes and honor. It's politics and bureaucracy and men like those guards who tried to arrest me this morning. If you're joining because of some story, you're joining for the wrong reasons. The room was dead silent. Peters looked concerned. James looked confused. But Sarah was watching Elijah carefully, like she understood something no one else did. With respect, sir, Taylor said, her voice steady. You're wrong. Excuse me. I'm not joining because I think the military is perfect. I'm joining because it's not, because it needs people who understand that character matters more than rank. That respect has to be earned, not demanded. That's what your story taught me. Not that heroes exist, but that anyone can choose to be one. Elijah stared at her. This young woman who barely knew him but somehow understood what he'd been trying to teach his whole life. You're going to have a hard time, he said quietly. I know. People will doubt you, underestimate you, try to make you small. I know that too. Then why do it? She smiled. Because someone has to. And because you showed me it's possible. Something in Elijah's chest cracked open. This was what David had wanted. Not recognition for recognition's sake, but this, the next generation learning to be better. What's your specialty? Elijah asked. Combat medic. Of course she was. Then let me tell you something, Elijah said. Every life you save matters, but not because it makes you a hero, because it gives someone else a chance to be one. You understand? Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. I worked for a living. She grinned and suddenly she looked like her grandfather. James put his arm around her. She's already better than I ever was. Smarter, stronger. She's going to do things we never dreamed of. That's what's supposed to happen, Elijah said. Every generation should be better than the last. Otherwise, what's the point? A man in a colonel's uniform approached. Mr. Brooks, I'm Colonel Vincent Hayes, Captain Hayes' father. Your son made a good call today, Elijah said. He called me. That's how this all started. He said there was an old veteran at the gate wearing a piece of shrapnel who claimed to know General Wallace. Said something about the way you stood made him think twice. So I called General Peters. Why? Elijah asked. Because 20 years ago, David Wallace told me a story about a medic called Shepard. He said if I ever met someone wearing shrapnel as a pin, I should pay attention. He said it would mean something important. Peters nodded. David seeded that story carefully, told it to people he trusted, made sure that if you ever surfaced, someone would recognize the signs. He was protecting you even then, Sarah said, making sure that if you ever needed help, it would be there. Elijah felt overwhelmed. For 57 years, he'd thought he was alone, invisible. But David had been watching over him the whole time, creating a network of people who would recognize him if necessary. I need some air, Elijah said suddenly. Sarah squeezed his arm. The garden's through the back. Take your time. He walked through the house past more people who stopped their conversations to watch him pass. Out through French doors, into a garden that was probably beautiful, but he barely noticed. He sat on a stone bench, his old body aching in a dozen places. The envelope Sarah had given him was still in his hand. He looked at it for a long moment, then opened it. Inside were several documents. The first was a letter from David written in the same shaky handwriting as the one from the cemetery. Elijah, if you're reading this, Sarah gave you the Brooks Protocol. I want you to understand what I'm asking. I want the military to learn from you not to exploit your story, but to be better because of it. I've outlined specific changes, training modules, policy adjustments, cultural shifts, all designed to prevent good people from being invisible simply because they don't fit expected patterns. I'm not asking you to become a public figure. I'm not asking you to give speeches or attend ceremonies. I'm just asking you to let this exist, to let your example teach people who will never meet you. The protocol doesn't use your name publicly. It refers to you only as the shepherd. Your privacy is protected, but your legacy, the lessons you taught me and 11 other men, will live on. Please say yes. The military needs this. The country needs this. Your friend David. The other documents were technical implementation plans, training schedules, policy recommendations. Elijah skimmed them. They were thorough, thoughtful. Everything David had done was like that. At the bottom of the stack was a single photograph, black and white, faded. It showed a young black man in jungle fatigues, face streaked with mud, holding a medical kit. Behind him were 11 wounded soldiers on stretchers being loaded onto helicopters. Elijah had never seen this photograph, didn't know it existed. On the back, in David's handwriting, "The Shepherd and His Flock, November 3rd, 1968. Never forget." Elijah stared at the photo, at the face of a young man he barely recognized, someone he'd been a lifetime ago. Footsteps behind him. He turned to see Peters approaching. "May I?" Peters asked, gesturing to the bench. Elijah nodded. They sat in silence for a moment. "You don't have to agree to any of this," Peters said finally. "David hoped you would, but he also made it clear that the choice is yours. If you want to remain invisible, we'll respect that." "But the story's out now," Elijah said. "Everyone in that house knows. The press knows. By tomorrow, the whole world will know." "True. But we can control how much they know. We can keep your privacy intact if that's what you want. What do you think I should do?" Peters considered this carefully. "I think you've been carrying this alone for too long. I think David gave you a gift, the chance to let others carry some of the weight. The question is whether you're ready to accept it." Elijah looked at the photograph again. That kid in the picture, he was so sure he was doing the right thing. So certain that if he just kept moving, kept saving people, everything would work out. Was he wrong? He was naive. He thought service mattered more than survival. He almost died because of it. But he didn't die. And 11 men lived because of what he did. 12, Elijah corrected quietly. "I was the 12th. I survived when I shouldn't have." Peters turned to look at him. "Is that what this is about, survivor's guilt?" "It's about the fact that I broke every rule, disobeyed every order, and somehow ended up being called a hero. Meanwhile, men who followed orders and did everything right died in that jungle, and no one remembers their names. So, honor them," Peter said simply. "Let the protocol exist. Let it teach the next generation to be better. That's how you make their deaths mean something. It won't bring them back. No, but it might save someone else." Elijah folded the photograph carefully and put it back in the envelope with the documents. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all we can ask." They sat there for a while longer, two old men in a garden carrying the weight of wars that ended decades ago but never really stopped. Inside the house, people were starting to leave. The repast was ending. Life was moving forward the way it always did after a funeral. But Elijah knew that nothing was really ending. This was just the beginning of something else. Something he didn't fully understand yet, but could feel coming like a storm on the horizon. When Peters finally drove Elijah back to his apartment that evening, the sun was already setting. The old building looked smaller somehow, more fragile. Like coming home after a war and realizing the place you left wasn't the place you remembered. "You need anything?" Peters asked as they pulled up to the curb. "Sleep," Elijah said. "About 57 years worth." Peters smiled but didn't laugh. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult. The press will find you. They always do." "Let them find me. I've been invisible this long. One more day won't kill me." But Peters shook his head. "You don't understand. This is news now. National news. The story's already on 3 major networks. By tomorrow morning, reporters will be camped outside your building. Elijah looked up at his 3rd-floor window. The light was off. Everything was exactly as he'd left it this morning, a lifetime ago. Then I'll deal with it tomorrow, he said. He got out of the car, his joints screaming in protest. Peters rolled down the window. Mr. Brooks, one more thing. Elijah turned back. Thank you, Peters said simply, for everything you did, everything you still do, just by being who you are. Elijah didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and walked toward the building entrance. Inside his apartment, the silence was crushing. He'd lived alone for 30 years since his wife Martha had passed, but tonight the emptiness felt different, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. He sat in his armchair without turning on the lights. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic. Somewhere, people were having dinner, watching television, living normal lives where the past stayed buried and the future wasn't terrifying. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer it, but something made him pick up. Mr. Brooks, a woman's voice. Professional. This is Amanda Chen from the Washington Post. I'm hoping to ask you a few questions about... He hung up. It rang again. Different number. He didn't answer. Again. 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 On the 5th call, he unplugged the phone from the wall. But that didn't stop them. Within an hour, someone was knocking on his door. Then another person. Then a third. He sat in his chair in the dark, listening to them knock and call his name through the door, and wondered if this was what David had felt like. If this constant attention was what it meant to be important. He hated it. Around midnight, the knocking finally stopped. Elijah stood slowly, his back protesting every movement, and walked to his bedroom. The envelope from Sarah was on his nightstand. He picked it up, carried it to the kitchen, and spread the documents across the table. The Brooks Protocol. 23 pages of policy recommendations, training modules, cultural reform initiatives, all centered around one simple idea. See the person, not the stereotype. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. The military didn't change easily. Institutions that entrenched, resisted transformation, like a body rejecting a transplant. But David had believed it was possible, had spent 2 years of his life designing this, had put his reputation behind it. Elijah read every word, twice. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking outside his window. He hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. He made coffee, the cheap instant kind that Martha had always hated, and sat back down at the table. The photograph David had saved was still there, that young medic's face staring up at him, judging him, asking him what he'd done with the life he'd been given. The phone started ringing again. He'd plugged it back in without thinking. He picked up. Mr. Brooks, this is CNN. He hung up. 3 more calls. 3 more hang-ups. Then his doorbell rang. He ignored it. It rang again and again. Someone leaned on it continuously for 30 seconds. Mr. Brooks, a voice shouted through the door. Please, I'm not a reporter. My name is Martin Cross. I was one of the 11. Elijah froze. He walked to the door, slowly looked through the peephole. A black man stood there, probably in his early 70s, wearing jeans and a Vietnam veteran's cap. Elijah opened the door. I don't remember you, he said immediately. I know, Martin said. I was unconscious the whole time. Took a round through the lung. You gave me a tracheotomy with a ballpoint pen. Elijah did remember that. The kid who couldn't breathe. The desperate improvisation. The sound of air rushing through the makeshift airway. Come in, Elijah said. Martin stepped inside, looked around the small apartment. Clean but sparse. Nothing on the walls. No photographs. No memories on display. You live like a ghost, Martin said. I am a ghost. Not anymore. That ended yesterday. They sat in the living room. Elijah didn't offer coffee. Didn't know what to say. I saw you on the news last night, Martin said. Saw General Peters saluting you. Saw the whole story come out. And I thought after 57 years, maybe it's time I said thank you in person. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do, because I need you to understand what you gave me. Martin pulled out his phone, showed Elijah a photo. A family gathered around a dinner table, smiling faces, 3 generations. "That's my family," Martin said. "My wife of 48 years, my 4 kids, my 9 grandchildren. Every single one of them exists because you shoved a pen into my throat in a jungle halfway around the world." Elijah stared at the photo. All those lives. All those futures. Branching out from one decision he'd made in a moment of desperation. "How many of us have come to see you?" Martin asked. "You're the second." "Good. That means 9 more are coming. We made a pact yesterday after we saw the news. All of us who are still alive. We're all coming to DC to say thank you." "That's not necessary." "It's absolutely necessary. You saved us and then disappeared. Let us honor that. Let us show you what your sacrifice created." "It wasn't a sacrifice," Elijah said sharply. "I did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong. Most people would have kept walking, would have saved themselves. You ran toward the gunfire. So did every other medic in that war. But you weren't assigned to us. You had no obligation. You could have let us die and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you risked everything." Martin leaned forward. "Do you know what happened to the lieutenant? The one you hit?" Elijah shook his head. "I tracked him down 10 years ago. He's dead now. Died in 1982. But before he died, he told people what happened, how you saved that kid, how he tried to have you court-martialed for disobeying orders, and you disappeared before they could arrest you. I don't want to hear this. He said you were the bravest man he ever met, said what you did haunted him for the rest of his life. Said he spent 14 years trying to find you to apologize." Elijah's hands clenched. He should have left it alone. Maybe, but he couldn't. None of us could. You left a mark on everyone you touched. The doorbell rang again, then knocking. Voices outside. "That'll be the press," Martin said. "They followed me here. I tried to lose them, but they're persistent. I'm not talking to them. You're going to have to eventually. The story's too big now. You can't put it back in the bottle." Elijah stood paced to the window. Outside, he could see news vans, reporters with cameras, a small crowd gathering. "This is what I was trying to avoid," he said. "This circus, this attention. I know, but maybe that's not your choice anymore. Maybe David took that choice away from you." Elijah spun around. He had no right. He had every right. You saved his life. That gave him the right to honor you however he saw fit. By making me a spectacle, by turning me into some kind of symbol, by making sure your example lives on. That's what the protocol is about, not celebrating you teaching others to be like you. The knocking got louder. Someone was shouting questions through the door. "You can't stay here," Martin said. "Not today. Maybe not ever again. This is my home. This was your hiding place. There's a difference." Elijah wanted to argue but couldn't. Martin was right. This apartment had never been a home. It was a bunker, a place to wait out the war that never ended. His phone rang. He picked it up without thinking. "Elijah," Sarah Wallace's voice. "Are you all right?" "Define all right." "The press has found you. We're sending security. Just hold tight." "I don't need security." "Yes, you do. Trust me on this. Peters is on his way. Don't open the door for anyone else." She hung up before he could protest. 20 minutes later, Peters arrived with 2 MPs and a security detail. They cleared the reporters from the hallway firmly but politely and escorted Elijah out through a back entrance. "Where are we going?" Elijah asked as they put him in another black Suburban. "Somewhere safe," Peters said. "Somewhere you can think without cameras in your face." They drove for 40 minutes, eventually pulling up to a hotel in Arlington. Not fancy, but clean, private. Peters had booked an entire floor. "This is too much," Elijah said. "This is necessary. You're news now. Whether you like it or not, people want to know your story." They took him to a suite on the 4th floor. Someone had already brought his things, clothes, toiletries, his medications. He had no memory of packing them. "How did you—" "We have resources," Peters said simply. "And before you argue, remember that David planned for this. He knew what would happen when the story came out. He made arrangements. Elijah sank into a chair. I feel like a prisoner. You're protected. There's a difference. Is there? Peters pulled up a chair, sat across from him. I need to brief you on what's happening. The story broke nationally last night. All three major networks led with it. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, everyone's running with it. You're trending on social media. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet you. The President's office has called twice. The President? Yes, they want to present you with the Medal of Honor, retroactively. Elijah's blood went cold. No. Mr. Brooks. I said no. I turned that medal down 57 years ago. I'm not accepting it now. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about what you represent. The military needs heroes right now. Good stories. Examples of service above self. Then find someone else. I'm not your poster boy. Peters sighed. I told David you'd say that. He predicted every argument you'd make. Then why did he do this? Because he believed in you more than you believe in yourself. Elijah stood, walked to the window. Outside, the world looked normal. Cars driving past, people going to work. No one knowing or caring about an old man's crisis 4 floors up. What if I just leave? Elijah asked. What if I disappear again? You can't. Not anymore. Your face is everywhere. Your name is everywhere. You'd be recognized within a day. Then I'll change my name, move somewhere remote, and abandon the protocol, abandon everything David worked for. Elijah turned to face him. The protocol doesn't need me. It can exist without me participating. It can, but it won't have the same impact. You're the living embodiment of what it teaches. Without you, it's just words on paper. Good. Let it be words. Words don't have heart attacks when strangers won't stop knocking on their door. Peter stood. I'll give you time to think. But Elijah and I'm calling you Elijah now because we're past formalities. You need to understand something. This isn't about glory or recognition. This is about the fact that every year thousands of veterans slip through the cracks. They're invisible, ignored, dismissed. The protocol is designed to change that, and you're the proof it matters. I'm just one man. So was David. So was Martin Luther King. So was every person who ever changed anything. One person choosing to stand up instead of disappear. He walked to the door, paused. The other 9 survivors are flying in tomorrow. They want to see you. All 11 of us together for the first time since 1968. Will you meet with them? Elijah didn't answer. I'll take that as a maybe, Peters said, and left. Alone in the suite, Elijah felt the walls closing in. He'd spent 57 years building a life of quiet invisibility, and in one day David had demolished it. He should be angry. He wanted to be angry. But all he felt was tired. His new phone, Peters had given him one with a private number, buzzed. A text from Sarah. I know this is overwhelming. David knew it would be. But he also believed you were strong enough to handle it. He believed in you until his last breath. Please don't prove him wrong. Elijah stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed a response. He didn't ask me. He should have asked. Sarah's reply came instantly. He couldn't, because he knew you'd say no, and he couldn't let you say no, not when so many people need what you have to teach. I'm not a teacher. I'm just an old man who did one thing right 57 years ago. You did everything right. Every day since, you just don't see it. Elijah set the phone down. He was exhausted, but knew he wouldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline. Too many ghosts stirring after decades of rest. He opened the documents again, read them a third time. This time he paid attention to the details, the specific training modules, the scenarios they'd created, the language they used. It was good. Better than good. It was exactly what the military needed. David had understood the problem deeply, the way institutional bias became invisible, the way power corrupted perception, the way good people could do terrible things simply by following protocol. But implementing it would be a war. Not a shooting war, but a cultural one. People would resist, call it political correctness, claim it was fixing something that wasn't broken. And David wanted Elijah to be the face of that fight. He'd said no to the Medal of Honor because medals were about glory. But this wasn't about glory. This was about change. Real structural change that might actually save lives. The question was whether Elijah had the strength for it. Whether an 86-year-old man who'd spent most of his life hiding could suddenly step into the light. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something told him to pick up. Hello, Mr. Brooks. A young voice. Female. Nervous. My name is Crystal. Crystal Hayes. I'm Captain Hayes' daughter. Captain Hayes from the cemetery. Yes, sir. I'm calling because my dad told me what happened, how you were treated at the gate, and I wanted you to know that it made me cry. Elijah didn't know what to say to that. I'm 14, Crystal continued, and I'm black, and every time I see someone who looks like me doing something important, it matters. It makes me believe I can do important things too. You can do important things, Elijah said quietly. You don't need me for that. But I do. Because when I saw you on TV, this old black man in a suit that didn't quite fit being saluted by a general, I thought that's what courage looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just quiet and strong and refusing to disappear. Elijah's throat tightened. My dad says you don't want the attention, Crystal said. And I get that. But Mr. Brooks, please don't disappear again. Because there are people like me who need to see you. Need to know that our stories matter too. Your story matters more than mine, Elijah said. Then tell yours, so I know how to tell mine. She hung up before he could respond. Elijah sat there holding the phone, feeling something shift inside him. Something he hadn't felt in decades. Not hope exactly, but possibility. He picked up the phone and called Peters. I'll meet with the 11, Elijah said. Tomorrow, but on one condition. Name it. No press. No cameras. Just us. Just the men who were there. Done. And I want to read the full protocol. Every word. Every implementation plan. If I'm going to be part of this, I need to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to. Peters was quiet for a moment. Then, you're agreeing. I'm considering. Don't make me regret it. You won't. I promise you won't. After he hung up, Elijah sat in the darkening room and thought about David, about the promise they'd made to each other 57 years ago in a jungle clearing where death was supposed to be inevitable. David had kept his promise, protected Elijah's name, given him the invisibility he'd needed to survive. Maybe it was time Elijah kept his promise too, the one he'd made to himself every day since that if he lived, it would mean something, that the survival would be worth the cost. The next morning, Peters arrived early with breakfast and a thick binder. The complete protocol, he said, every policy change, every training module, every implementation timeline. David spent 2 years on this. It's thorough. Elijah took the binder. It was heavy, substantial. The others will be here at noon, Peters continued. All 9 who are still alive. James Morrison and Martin Cross you've already met. The other 7 are coming in from across the country. Some of them haven't seen each other since the war. Do they know I'm the one who asked for privacy? They know. They agreed immediately. They said they'd meet you in a ditch if that's what it took. At noon, Peters led Elijah to a conference room in the hotel. It was simple. Large table, comfortable chairs. No decorations except an American flag in the corner. The door opened and they filed in one by one. Old men now, gray hair, weathered faces, bodies worn down by time and war. But their eyes were the same. Sharp, knowing, carrying weight. James Morrison, Martin Cross, and 7 others Elijah had carried through hell. They stood when Elijah entered, all of them. A spontaneous sign of respect that made Elijah want to run. Please don't, he said. Please just sit. They sat slowly, all watching him. I don't know what to say to you, Elijah admitted. I don't remember most of your faces. I just remember the weight, the blood, the sounds you made. We don't remember your face either, one man said. His name tag read Wilson. We just remember surviving when we shouldn't have. Tell us what you remember, another said. Patterson. We've spent 57 years wondering what you went through, what it cost you. So Elijah told them. Everything he'd told Sarah and David's children, about deserting, about the lieutenant, about finding them by accident and making the choice that changed everything. They listened in absolute silence. When he finished, several of them were crying. "You weren't supposed to be there," Wilson said. "You were AWOL. You could have been executed." "I know. Why did you risk it? Why didn't you just keep walking?" Elijah looked at each of them in turn. "Because you were screaming, and I was a medic, and medics don't walk away from screaming." Patterson stood, suddenly walked around the table and embraced Elijah. "Thank you. Thank you for not walking away." One by one, the others did the same. 9 old men embracing the man who'd given them their lives back. When they finally sat down again, Martin spoke. "We've talked among ourselves about the protocol, about what David wanted. We want you to know that we support it, all of us, and if you need us to fight for it, we will." "It's not your fight," Elijah said. "Yes, it is. You gave us these lives. The least we can do is use them to make sure your example matters." James nodded. "We've already started. Each of us has contacted our local VA, our representatives. We're telling the story. Your story, our story." "I never wanted—" "We know what you wanted," Wilson interrupted gently. "But this isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what's right." They spent the next 3 hours talking about the war, about the lives they'd lived since, about children and grandchildren, and the weight of surviving when so many hadn't. And slowly, Elijah began to understand what David had known all along. This wasn't about him. It was about the chain of cause and effect, about how one choice rippled forward through time, touching lives he'd never know. When the meeting finally ended and the men began to leave, Patterson stopped at the door. "I became a teacher," he said, "because of you. I figured if one person could change 11 lives in one day, maybe I could change a few lives over a lifetime. I taught for 40 years, thousands of students. Some of them went on to do incredible things, and it all started because you didn't walk away." After they left, Elijah sat alone in the conference room with Peters. "They're remarkable men," Peter said. "They were remarkable before I met them. I just kept them alive long enough for the world to see it. That's what the protocol is about. Keeping people alive physically and culturally long enough for others to see their worth." Elijah picked up the binder Peters had brought. "I'll read this, all of it, and then I'll decide. That's all I ask." But they both knew Elijah had already decided. The moment Crystal Hayes had called. The moment he'd seen the faces of the 11 men he'd saved. The moment he'd understood that invisibility wasn't protection, it was another kind of death. That night alone in his hotel room, Elijah read every word of the Brooks Protocol. And by the time he finished, dawn was breaking again. He hadn't slept in 48 hours, but he'd never felt more awake. He called Peters. "I'll do it," he said. "Whatever you need, but on my terms." "Name them." "No Medal of Honor, no White House ceremony, no spectacle." "Agreed. I'll work with the protocol implementation. I'll meet with trainers. I'll help design the modules, but I won't be the face of it publicly. I'll be the foundation it's built on." David would accept that. "And one more thing. Every dollar the military saves by preventing another veteran from being mistreated, every dollar that would have gone to lawsuits or settlements goes into a fund for veterans who slip through the cracks. The invisible ones. The ones who need help but are too proud or too scared to ask." Peters was quiet for a long moment. "That's brilliant. David would have loved that." David did love that. It's in the protocol. Page 73. He called it the Shepherd Fund. Peters laughed. Of course he did. That manipulative genius. "He knew me too well." "No. He knew exactly how good you are. There's a difference." When they hung up, Elijah walked to the window and looked out at the sunrise. Somewhere out there, people were waking up, starting their days, living lives that might intersect with his in ways neither of them would ever know. And for the first time in 57 years, Elijah Brooks wasn't invisible. He was finally, terrifyingly seen. 3 weeks later, Elijah stood in front of 40 military instructors at Fort Benning and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. They sat in neat rows, uniforms, pressed notebooks open, waiting for him to speak. Some looked skeptical, others curious. A few, the older ones, looked like they already knew what he was going to say and didn't want to hear it. Peter stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching. Elijah had never given a speech in his life, never wanted to. But the protocol required training, and the training required someone who understood what they were teaching, someone who'd lived it. "My name is Elijah Brooks," he started, his voice rough. "And I'm not here to tell you war stories." A few instructors shifted in their seats. "I'm here because 57 years ago I made a choice that should have gotten me killed. Instead, it saved 11 lives, and 3 weeks ago that choice almost got me arrested at a funeral because 2 guards couldn't see past their own assumptions." Now he had their attention. "The Brooks Protocol isn't about me. It's about the fact that every day veterans walk into VA hospitals, military installations, and memorials, and they're invisible. Not because they're trying to be, but because the people looking at them don't know how to see." He pulled out the piece of shrapnel from his lapel, held it up. "This is shrapnel from a mortar that should have killed a lieutenant in Vietnam. He gave it to me as a thank you. It's not a medal. It's not official. But it means more to me than any ribbon ever could." And the guards at Arlington looked at it and saw junk. Several instructors were writing now. "Here's what I need you to understand. When you're standing at a gate or behind a desk or anywhere you have authority, you're going to meet people who don't fit your picture of what a veteran looks like. They might be old. They might be poor. They might not have the right paperwork. And your job, your actual job, is to look deeper." An instructor raised his hand. Young guy. Couldn't have been more than 30. "Sir, with respect, we have protocols, security measures. We can't just let anyone in because they claim to have served." "I'm not asking you to let anyone in. I'm asking you to ask better questions, to look for the signs that matter. The way someone stands, the way they speak, the things they carry that aren't official but are real." "That's subjective," the instructor argued. "Yes, it is, and that's exactly the point. You can't reduce human dignity to a checklist. You have to actually see people." Another hand went up. Older woman, Master Sergeant Stripes. "What if we make a mistake? What if we extend courtesy to someone who doesn't deserve it? Then you've erred on the side of respect. Is that really so terrible? It could be a security risk. So could missing the real threats because you're too busy hassling an 86-year-old man who just wants to say goodbye to his friend." The room went quiet. Peter stepped forward. "Let me be clear about something. This protocol is not optional. It's not a suggestion. As of next month, every installation in the United States military will implement these training modules. Every gate guard, every VA intake specialist, every person who has the power to make a veteran feel invisible or seen. And if we disagree with it," someone asked from the back. "Then you find a different career," Peter said flatly. "Because if you can't treat people with basic human dignity, you have no business wearing that uniform." After the session ended, several instructors approached Elijah. Most thanked him. A few challenged him on details. One, a sergeant named Rodriguez, pulled him aside. "Mr. Brooks, I need to tell you something." "Go ahead." "I was that guard, not at Arlington, but somewhere else. 5 years ago, I turned away an old black veteran from a ceremony. He didn't have the right credentials. I followed protocol, did everything by the book." Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "He killed himself 3 days later. Left a note saying he just wanted to be remembered. That's all. Just acknowledged for what he'd done." Elijah felt the air leave his lungs. "I found out later he'd earned a Silver Star, had served 2 tours, was a decorated soldier, but I couldn't see it because I was too busy checking boxes." "It wasn't your fault," Elijah said quietly. "Yes, it was, and I've carried it every day since. So when I heard about this protocol about what happened to you, I volunteered to be here, because I need to learn how to see better, before I miss someone else." Rodriguez's eyes were wet. "Teach us, please. Teach us so we stop losing people who deserve better." That night back at the hotel, Elijah told Peters about Rodriguez. "There are thousands like him," Peters said. Good people who made bad calls because the system trained them to value procedure over people. That's what we're changing. One training session won't fix 50 years of culture. No, but 50 training sessions might, 100, 1,000. We chip away at it until the culture shifts. Elijah's phone rang. Sarah Wallace. "How did today go?" she asked. "Harder than I expected. These instructors, they want to do right, but they're scared of making mistakes." "Fear is the enemy of compassion," Sarah said. David used to say that. He said the moment you let fear drive your decisions, you stop seeing people as humans and start seeing them as problems. He was right. He usually was, which is why I'm calling. The family wants to do something, a memorial service. Private. Just us and the 11 survivors and their families. We want you there. Sarah. Not as a guest, as family, because that's what you are to us. David's brother in everything but blood. Elijah didn't know what to say. Family was something he'd lost decades ago. Martha had been his family, and when she died, he'd been alone. He'd convinced himself he preferred it that way. When, he asked. Saturday, at the house. Just dinner and remembrance. Nothing formal. I'll be there. The days between the training and Saturday blurred together. More sessions at Fort Benning, meetings with VA administrators, calls with senators who wanted to be seen supporting the protocol. Elijah hated the political part. The photo opportunities, the way people used his story to advance their own agendas. But Peters was always there running interference, making sure Elijah's privacy was protected, even as his presence was required. On Thursday, something happened that changed everything. Elijah was in his hotel room when Peters burst in, phone in hand, face pale. "We have a situation," Peters said, "a big one." "What happened?" "A reporter got access to military records, found documentation about Operation Shepherd, found your name, your real service record." Elijah's blood went cold. "That's impossible. David said those records were sealed." "They were. Someone unsealed them. Someone with high-level access." "Why?" Peters hesitated. "Because there are people in the military who don't want this protocol implemented, who see it as political correctness, as weakness, and they're using your story to undermine it." "How?" "They're claiming you were a deserter, that you assaulted an officer, that the whole Shepherd operation was you trying to escape court-martial. They're saying David Wallace covered for you because you saved his life, but that doesn't change the fact that you broke military law." Elijah sat down hard. This was what he'd feared for 57 years. The truth coming out. The context being stripped away. The hero narrative collapsing into something ugly and complicated. "Is it true?" Peters asked quietly. "You know it's true. I told you everything." "I know. But now I need to know if there's anything else. Anything they could use to destroy the protocol." Elijah thought for a long moment. "There's one thing. Something I never told anyone. Not even David." Peters waited. "The lieutenant I hit. The one who came at me. I said I put him down with one punch." "Yes. That's not exactly what happened. He came at me and I defended myself. But after he went down, I stood over him, had my hands around a rock, was about to bring it down on his head." Peter's face didn't change. "But you didn't." "No. One of the other soldiers stopped me, kid named Thompson. He grabbed my arm and said, 'Don't. Don't let him turn you into something you're not.' So I dropped the rock and ran. That's self-defense. Maybe excessive, but understandable given the circumstances. The military won't see it that way. They'll see attempted murder of an officer." Peters pulled out his phone, made a call. "I need a full legal review of the Brooks case. Every document, every witness statement if any exist. I need to know our exposure." He hung up, looked at Elijah. "We're going to fight this. Full transparency. We'll release your complete service record ourselves before they can weaponize it. That'll destroy everything. Or it'll prove that the protocol is necessary, that good people can make complicated choices in impossible situations. That context matters. That's the whole point, isn't it?" Elijah wanted to argue but couldn't. Peters was right. The protocol was about seeing the whole person, not just the convenient parts. There's something else you need to know, Peters said. The reporter who got the records. He's planning to run the story tomorrow morning. National news. Your desertion, the assault, everything. Then it's over. Not if we get ahead of it. Peters made another call, this time to Sarah Wallace. We need to move up the memorial, he said. Tonight. And we need press there. Controlled press. People we trust. Why? Sarah asked through the speaker. Because tomorrow Elijah's story is going to be twisted into something it's not. We need the people who were actually there, the 11, to tell the truth first. There was a long pause. I'll make the calls. 3 hours later, Elijah stood in the Wallace family home again. But this time, cameras were there. 3 reporters Peters had personally vetted, the 11 survivors and their families, Sarah and her children. This is a mistake, Elijah said quietly to Peters. This is the only move we have. If we let them control the narrative, we lose everything. Sarah stood at the front of the room. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're here tonight to honor my husband's memory and to tell the truth about a man who's been hidden for too long. She gestured to the survivors. These men are alive because of Elijah Brooks, but the story of how he saved them is more complicated than what you've heard on the news, and we're going to tell you all of it. James Morrison went first. He told the story of the ambush, the 11 men trapped and dying, the medic who appeared out of nowhere. Then Martin Cross stood. But here's what you don't know. That medic Elijah, he wasn't supposed to be there. He was AWOL, running from a court-martial. He could have kept running. Instead, he ran toward us. The reporters were leaning forward now, sensing the real story. Wilson stood next. I was there the day before, when the incident happened with the lieutenant. I saw the whole thing. Elijah saved a kid's life. The lieutenant tried to have him arrested for it. And when Elijah defended himself, he had every right to. Patterson added, the lieutenant was a racist, said things I won't repeat, treated Elijah like he was less than human. And when Elijah finally stood up for himself, the system turned on him. One of the reporters raised her hand. So you're saying he assaulted an officer? I'm saying he protected himself from an officer who attacked him first, Patterson said firmly. There's a difference. But he still deserted. He left a situation where staying meant dying either in prison or at the hands of men who hated him for his skin color. That's not desertion. That's survival. The other survivors nodded. Every single one. And then, James said, he used that survival to save 11 lives. 11 men who went on to have families, careers, futures. If that's desertion, then I pray for more deserters like him. The room erupted in agreement. The families of the survivors stood and applauded. Sarah was crying. Elijah sat in the corner, overwhelmed. These men he'd saved were now saving him. One of the reporters turned to Elijah. Mr. Brooks, do you regret what you did, hitting the lieutenant? Running. Elijah stood slowly. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that a black medic in 1968 couldn't defend himself without facing execution. I regret that the system was so broken that my only choice was to disappear. But do you regret the actions themselves? No, because those actions led me to 11 men who needed help. And if I had to choose between following unjust orders and saving lives, I'd save lives every single time, even if it cost you everything. It did cost me everything. My name, my record, my ability to live openly as a veteran. But those 11 men got to live, and I got to keep my humanity. So yes, I'd do it again. The interview went on for another hour. The survivors told story after story about their lives after Vietnam, about the children and grandchildren who existed because Elijah hadn't walked away, about the teachers, doctors, business people, and soldiers who'd come from their families. We're not just 11 men, Martin said to the cameras. We're a legacy. Hundreds of people who trace their existence back to one choice Elijah Brooks made in a jungle clearing. And every single one of us is proof that complicated people can do heroic things. When the reporters finally left, Elijah felt hollowed out, exposed in a way he'd never been before. Sarah approached him. "Are you all right?" "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow when the world decides whether I'm a hero or a criminal." "You're both," she said simply. "You're human." That's what David understood. That's what the protocol teaches. We're all both. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He paced his hotel room waiting for morning, waiting for the news cycle to devour him. At 6 a.m., Peters knocked on his door with a laptop. "It's running," he said. "All 3 networks. But it's not what you think." He turned the laptop around. The headline read, "The Shepherd, How One Man's Desertion Became an Act of Salvation." The article was fair, honest. It didn't hide Elijah's desertion or the assault, but it contextualized it, explained the racism he'd faced, the impossible choices, the fact that 11 men were alive because of those choices. Another headline, "When Breaking the Rules is the Right Thing to Do, the Elijah Brooks Story." And another, "The Medal He Refused Inside the Secret Rescue That Changed Military Culture." Peters was grinning. "They're not destroying you, they're understanding you." "This won't last," Elijah said. "People love a scandal. Give it a few days and they'll turn." But Peters shook his head. "Watch." He pulled up social media on his phone. Thousands of comments, most of them supportive. "My grandfather faced the same racism in the Army. Thank you for telling this story. This is why the Brooks Protocol matters. We've been failing veterans for decades. A deserter who saved 11 lives is worth more than 100 officers who followed orders blindly." There were negative comments too. People calling Elijah a criminal, saying he should have been court-martialed regardless of the circumstances. But they were outnumbered 10-1 by people who understood. "Public opinion is shifting," Peters said. "Not just about you, about the protocol, about how we treat veterans who don't fit the mold." Elijah's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Brooks." A young man's voice. "My name is Marcus. I'm a veteran. Iraq. I was dishonorably discharged for defending a female soldier from assault by a superior officer. I've been trying to get my discharge upgraded for 7 years." "I'm sorry," Elijah said, not knowing what else to say. "Don't be sorry. You just gave me hope. Your story, it's my story. It's thousands of veterans' stories. People who did the right thing and got punished for it. And now maybe people will listen." After he hung up, the phone rang again. And again, and again. Veterans calling to share their stories, to say thank you, to say they'd been invisible too. Elijah listened to each one, and with each call he understood what David had known. This wasn't about one old man's redemption. This was about systemic change, about forcing an institution to look at itself honestly. By noon, the Secretary of Defense had released a statement supporting the Brooks Protocol. By evening, 3 senators had introduced legislation to fund it nationally. The cultural tide was turning. But that night, alone in his room, Elijah felt the weight of it. Every story he'd heard, every veteran who'd suffered in silence, the magnitude of the problem he'd accidentally become the face of. He called Sarah. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he admitted. "You don't have to be," she said gently. "You just have to be willing. The strength will come from everyone else, from the 11, from the veterans calling you, from everyone who sees themselves in your story. What if I fail them? You already saved them just by existing. Everything else is extra." Saturday came. The memorial Sarah had planned was smaller, now intimate, just family and the survivors. They gathered in the garden where Elijah had sat 3 weeks ago reading David's letter. Someone had planted new flowers. Something about that made Elijah want to cry. Sarah asked everyone to share a memory of David. When it came to Elijah's turn, he stood slowly. "I didn't know David long," he said. 19 hours in hell, then 57 years of phone calls. But he knew me better than anyone. He saw who I was when I couldn't see it myself. And he spent the last years of his life making sure I'd finally be seen by everyone else. He pulled out David's letter, the one from the cemetery. He wrote me something. He said heroes don't need medals. They need other people to step up. And I think what he meant was that heroism isn't about one person doing one thing. It's about creating a chain reaction, a legacy. Elijah looked at the survivors, at their children and grandchildren. David gave me my life back that day in the jungle, and then he gave me 57 years to figure out what to do with it. I'm still figuring it out, but I think I'm finally starting to understand. He sat down, hands shaking. Rebecca Wallace, David's daughter, stood next. My father left instructions. One more thing he wanted done. She pulled out a box, opened it. Inside was a piece of shrapnel identical to the one Elijah wore, but this one was mounted on a plaque. He had this made, Rebecca said, weeks before he died. He wanted you to have it, not as a replacement, but as a reminder. She handed it to Elijah. The plaque read, "For Elijah Brooks the Shepherd, who taught us that the most important medals are the ones we forge ourselves from the shrapnel of our choices. November 3rd, 1968. Forever." Elijah couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The gathering ended as the sun set. People hugged goodbye, made promises to stay in touch. The survivors formed a circle around Elijah before they left. "We're with you," James said. "Whatever comes next, however hard it gets. We're with you." "Always," Martin added. And Elijah believed them. That night, Peters drove him back to his apartment, the one he hadn't seen in 3 weeks. "You can stay at the hotel," Peters offered, "if this feels too exposed." "No," Elijah said. "I need to go home. Need to remember who I am when no one's watching." Inside the apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Empty, silent, but somehow different. Like the walls had absorbed what happened and held it differently now. He sat in his armchair, the same one he'd sat in the morning of the funeral. The same one he'd sat in for 30 years, waiting for something he couldn't name. He wasn't waiting anymore. He was ready. 6 months after David's funeral, Elijah Brooks walked into a diner in Southeast DC and ordered coffee. Black, no sugar, the same way he'd been drinking it for 60 years. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, brought it over without a word. Elijah liked this place because nobody recognized him here. Despite everything that had happened, despite his face being on the news for weeks, this diner remained a sanctuary. People here had their own problems. They didn't care about old men and their wars. He was reading the newspaper when someone slid into the booth across from him. Mitchell, the guard from Arlington. Elijah looked up slowly. The young man looked different, thinner. Older somehow, though only 6 months had passed. "Mr. Brooks," Mitchell said, "please don't leave. I just need 5 minutes." Elijah set down his coffee. "You're not supposed to contact me. The settlement agreement—" "I know. I'm violating it. If you report me, I'll lose everything. But I had to find you, had to tell you something." "Tell me what—" Mitchell's hands were shaking on the table. "I've been trying to apologize for 6 months, writing letters, calling, but every time I couldn't find the words. How do you apologize for treating someone like they're invisible, for putting your hands on them, for being exactly the kind of person you hate?" "You don't," Elijah said quietly. "You just do better next time." That's what everyone says, but it's not enough. Doing better doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't. But carrying guilt forever doesn't help anyone either. Mitchell looked down at his hands. "I quit. Left the army 3 weeks ago. Couldn't wear the uniform anymore. Couldn't look at myself in the mirror." "That was stupid," Elijah said. Mitchell's head snapped up. "What?" "Quitting. Running away. You think that makes it better? You think sacrificing your career somehow balances the scales. You thought wrong. The military needs people who've made mistakes and learned from them. People who know what it feels like to be on the wrong side of power. That's what the protocol is teaching. That's what you could have taught." "I can't go back. They won't take me." "Then you fight to get back. You earn your way back, because giving up is just another way of being a coward." The words hit Mitchell like a physical blow, his eyes filled with tears. I wanted to hurt you that day, Mitchell admitted. When you wouldn't leave, when you kept insisting you belonged there. I wanted to drag you away, wanted to make you feel small, and I didn't even know why. I just felt this anger, and I took it out on you. I know. How could you know? Because I've been that angry. I've wanted to hurt people who didn't deserve it. The difference is I recognized it in time. You didn't. But now you have the chance to do something with that knowledge. Mitchell wiped his eyes. The protocol is being implemented at my old base next month. They asked if I'd come back, help train the new guards, show them what not to do. And I said no, said I wasn't qualified, that I'd just mess it up again. Elijah leaned forward. Let me tell you something about messing up. 57 years ago, I hit an officer, almost killed him, ran away instead of facing consequences. And for 57 years, I told myself I'd done the only thing I could do, that there was no other choice. But there was. Maybe not. But I'll never know because I ran. And David Wallace, the man I saved, the man whose funeral you blocked me from, he spent his whole life trying to convince me that my choice mattered, that my mistakes didn't define me. Did you believe him? Not until the day I stood in front of you and you couldn't see me. That's when I realized David was right. Our mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does. Mitchell was quiet for a long time. If I go back, they'll use me as an example. The racist guard who learned better. I'll be the bad guy in every training session. Yes, you will. And you'll have to stand there and take it. Over and over, every class, every question, every accusation. Can you handle that? I don't know. Then figure it out. Because that's what redemption looks like. Not quitting, not disappearing, but standing in the fire until you come out the other side. Mitchell stood slowly. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Don't thank me, just do the work. After Mitchell left, the waitress came over. You want more coffee? Please. She poured, then hesitated. I saw you on TV. My brother served, Iraq. He came home and couldn't get help. VA kept losing his paperwork. Said he didn't qualify. He died 2 years ago. Pills. Elijah's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just keep doing what you're doing. That protocol thing. Make sure nobody else's brother disappears. She walked away before he could respond. Elijah sat there for another hour, drinking coffee and thinking about all the brothers who'd disappeared. All the veterans who'd come home from war only to fight another war with the institutions that were supposed to protect them. His phone rang. Peters. We have a problem, Peters said without preamble. What kind of problem? The kind that could destroy everything we've built. How fast can you get to the Pentagon? 90 minutes later, Elijah was sitting in a conference room surrounded by generals and bureaucrats. Peters sat beside him, jaw tight with tension. A 2-star general named Hawkins stood at the front of the room. He looked like he'd eaten something bitter and couldn't spit it out. Gentlemen and Mr. Brooks, we've received intelligence that concerns the Brooks Protocol, specifically concerns about its implementation and potential national security implications. What implications? Peters asked sharply. Hawkins pulled up a slide. 3 installations have reported increased security breaches since implementing the protocol. Unauthorized personnel gaining access. Contraband being smuggled in. Our analysts believe the more lenient approach to gate security has created vulnerabilities. That's absurd, Peters said. The protocol doesn't eliminate security measures. It enhances them by training personnel to actually assess threats instead of relying on stereotypes. Nevertheless, the data shows correlation, not causation. What else changed at those installations in the same period? Hawkins looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss other operational factors. Peters stood. Then you're cherry-picking data to support a predetermined conclusion. Who put you up to this? What general is threatened by having to treat people with dignity? General Peters, I resent. I don't care what you resent. The Brooks Protocol was approved by the Secretary of Defense. It's been successful at 47 installations. 3 outliers don't invalidate the entire program. Perhaps not, but they raise questions. Questions that need answers before we proceed with nationwide implementation. Elijah had been silent through all of this, watching the power struggle unfold. But now he spoke. You don't want answers. You want an excuse. Everyone turned to look at him. You've decided the protocol is inconvenient, makes your job harder, requires you to think instead of just following procedures. So you're looking for any reason, any data point, no matter how flimsy, to kill it. Mr. Brooks, with respect, don't give me respect you don't mean. Just tell me the truth. Do you believe in what the protocol teaches or not? Hawkins was quiet for a long moment. I believe in security, in protocols that keep our personnel safe, in systems that work. And you think treating veterans with dignity makes us less safe. I think lowering our standards makes us vulnerable. The protocol doesn't lower standards. It changes what we measure. Instead of checking boxes, we're training people to use judgment, to see context, to recognize that not every threat looks the same and not every veteran fits a mold. That's subjective. Judgment is subjective. Boxes can be audited. Boxes also miss people. People like me. People like the 300 veterans who've contacted us in the last 6 months saying the protocol saved their lives, literally, because someone finally saw them as human instead of as problems. Another general spoke up. 3 stars. Woman. Name tag read Morrison. Wait, Morrison. Elijah looked closer. She had James Morrison's eyes. I'm General Diane Morrison, she said. My father is one of the 11 men Mr. Brooks saved. I've spent 30 years in this military, risen through the ranks. And I can tell you that the culture General Hawkins is defending is the same culture that would have left my father to die in that jungle, because the medic who saved him was the wrong color and had the wrong paperwork. Hawkins' face went red. General Morrison, that's not... It's exactly what you're saying. You want systems that are easy to audit over people who are actually saved. You want the appearance of security over actual human dignity. The military runs on order, on protocols. We can't just let people do whatever they think is right. That's not what the Brooks Protocol teaches, and you know it. It teaches discernment, context, the ability to see the difference between a real threat and an old man trying to attend a funeral. The room erupted in argument, generals talking over each other, Peters and Hawkins nearly shouting. Elijah sat quietly watching it all fall apart. Finally, the most senior person in the room, a 4-star general named Carson, raised his hand for silence. Enough. General Hawkins, your concerns are noted, but General Morrison is correct. The data doesn't support shutting down the protocol. It supports fixing implementation at the 3 installations where problems occurred. Sir, I must object. Your objection is noted and overruled. The Brooks Protocol continues. Nationwide rollout proceeds as planned. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the Secretary of Defense. I'm sure he'd love to hear why you think treating veterans with respect is a security threat. Hawkins sat down defeated. After the meeting, General Morrison approached Elijah. My father talks about you every Thanksgiving, she said. Has for as long as I can remember. He tells the story of the medic who carried him 19 hours through hell. And every time he ends it the same way, he didn't have to, he just did. Your father earned his survival. No, you gave it to him. And he gave me life. And I gave my children life. 3 generations exist because you didn't walk away. So when men like Hawkins try to undermine what you're teaching, I take it personally. He's scared, Elijah said. Change is scary, especially for people who've built their careers on the old way. That doesn't excuse it. No, but understanding it helps us fight it better. Morrison smiled slightly. My father said you were wise. I thought he was exaggerating. He was. I'm just old. People confuse the two. That night, Peters and Elijah had dinner at a restaurant near the Pentagon. They didn't talk about the meeting, didn't talk about the protocol or the resistance or any of it. They just ate and watched people go about their normal lives. You ever regret it? Peters asked finally. Getting involved in all this? Elijah thought about it. Every day and never, both at the same time. That doesn't make sense. Most true things don't. Peters laughed. David said the same thing once. almost word for word. David and I understood each other, even when we didn't talk. Even when 57 years separated us, we understood. He left you something else, Peter said. I was supposed to give it to you when the protocol was fully implemented, but I think now's the right time. He pulled out an envelope, different from the others. This one was thick, heavy. Elijah opened it. Inside was a key and a letter. Dear Elijah, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means the protocol survived its first major challenge. Congratulations, you're not done yet. Elijah kept reading. David had bought a small house in Virginia. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, small yard, fully paid off. He'd left it to Elijah in his will. You've lived in that apartment for 30 years, David wrote. Hiding, waiting. That's over now. This house is yours, not as a gift, as a responsibility. Because I'm asking you to do something with it. Something important. The letter explained David's vision. The house would become a halfway point. A place where veterans who were struggling could stay for a few days, get their feet under them, connect with resources. No paperwork, no bureaucracy, just a safe place and someone who understood. You'll run it, David wrote, with help of course. But it needs someone who knows what it's like to feel invisible. Someone who won't judge, won't demand explanations, will just provide space and dignity. Elijah set the letter down. He's asking too much. Is he? Or is he asking exactly what you've been preparing for your whole life? I'm 86 years old. I don't have the energy for this. You just survived 6 months of public scrutiny, military politics, and constant pressure. You have more energy than men half your age. That's different. That was necessary. This is also necessary. David knew what the protocol couldn't fix. All the veterans who slipped through the cracks, who need more than policy changes, who need a human connection. Elijah looked at the key, small, silver, holding the weight of another 57 years of commitment. I'll think about it, he said, but Peter smiled. You're already planning how to set it up. I can see it in your eyes. 3 weeks later, Elijah stood in the small house in Virginia. It needed work, paint, repairs, furniture, but it had good bones, strong foundations. Martin Cross and James Morrison showed up with tools, then Wilson, then Patterson, all the survivors ready to help. You don't have to do this, Elijah said. Yes, we do, James replied. You gave us our lives. Let us give you this. They worked for days, painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, building beds. Their children came to help, their grandchildren. Lieutenant Taylor Morrison, now promoted to captain, took leave to assist. The house transformed, became something warm, welcoming, a place where broken people could start to heal. On opening day, no one showed up. Elijah sat in the living room alone, wondering if David had been wrong, if there was no need for this place after all. Then, just after dark, someone knocked. A young veteran stood on the porch, couldn't have been more than 25. His eyes were hollow. His hands shook. Is this the place? He asked. The place where you don't have to explain. This is the place, Elijah said. I don't have money. Don't have anywhere else to go. The VA keeps saying my paperwork is being processed, but it's been 8 months, and I'm living in my car, and I just need a few days. Just a few days to figure things out. Come in, Elijah said. Stay as long as you need. The kid broke down crying right there in the doorway. Elijah let him. Didn't try to fix it. Didn't offer empty reassurances. Just stood there until the crying stopped. What's your name? Elijah asked finally. Marcus. I called you once, 6 months ago, about my discharge. Elijah remembered. The veteran who'd been punished for doing the right thing. Did you get it upgraded? No, still fighting. But your story, it kept me going. Kept me from giving up. Then let's keep you going a little longer. Come on, I'll show you your room. Over the next month, 7 more veterans came through, each with their own story, each carrying wounds that couldn't be seen but wouldn't heal. Elijah listened to all of them, didn't judge, Didn't try to fix everything, just provided space and time and the kind of dignity that comes from being seen. One evening, Peter stopped by, found Elijah in the kitchen making dinner for 3 current residents. "This is good," Peter said, looking around. "Really good. David would be proud." David would say, "I'm not doing enough." Probably. That's why you two worked so well together. You both had impossibly high standards. Elijah smiled despite himself. "How's the protocol rollout going?" "Better than expected. Resistance at some installations, but mostly people are responding well. We've had 47 success stories in the last month. Veterans who would have been turned away but weren't, because someone took the time to look deeper. 47 people. That's good. It's a start, but there are thousands more, maybe tens of thousands. We're chipping away at a mountain. Then we keep chipping." Peters pulled out his phone, showed Elijah a video. It was Mitchell, the guard from Arlington, speaking to a room full of new recruits. "I was the worst example of what not to be," Mitchell was saying in the video. "I saw an old black man at a gate, and I saw a problem. I didn't see a veteran, didn't see a hero, didn't see a human being who'd earned more respect than I could ever give. And it took getting publicly humiliated to wake me up." The recruits were listening intently. The Brooks Protocol isn't about being soft. It's about being smart, about recognizing that threats don't always look like you expect, and heroes don't always have the right credentials. It's about using your brain instead of just following a checklist. Elijah watched the rest of the video in silence. When it ended, he handed the phone back. "He came to see me," Elijah said, "few months ago, at a diner." "I know. He told me. Said you gave him a second chance." "I gave him perspective. What he does with it is his choice. He's choosing well. He's one of our best trainers now. The recruits respect him because he's honest about his failures." Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Brooks phoned for you. Says it's urgent." Elijah took the call. It was Sarah Wallace. "Elijah, I need you to come to Arlington. Now. Something's happened." Her voice was shaking. An hour later, Elijah stood at David's grave. Sarah was there with her children, General Morrison, the survivors who lived nearby, and 2 people Elijah had never seen before. One was an old Vietnamese man, probably in his 80s. The other was a younger woman, maybe 40, who stood beside him. "Elijah," Sarah said, "this is Nguyen Van Than. He's traveled from Vietnam to meet you." The old man stepped forward, bowed deeply. "You saved my son," he said in broken English. "November 1968. You save American soldiers. My son was there too. He was VC. He was wounded. You give him water. You patch his wound even though he was enemy." Elijah's mind raced back. He did remember. A young Vietnamese soldier, barely 18, bleeding from a leg wound. Elijah had stopped to help him while carrying one of the 11, had given him water, had wrapped the wound quickly before moving on. "You show mercy," Nguyen continued. "When you could have left him to die, when you could have killed him, you show mercy. And he lived. He came home. He had family. He had life." The younger woman stepped forward. "I'm his daughter. My father died 5 years ago. But before he died, he told me about the black medic who saved him. Said he spent 50 years trying to find you, to say thank you. When your story appeared on news," Nguyen said, "I knew it was you. I had to come, had to honor you the way my son wanted to honor you." He pulled out a small carved wooden box, opened it. Inside was a medal, Vietnamese old worn. "This was my son's, his only possession from the war. He wanted you to have it." Elijah stared at the medal. He'd saved one of the enemy, hadn't even thought about it. The kid was wounded and needed help. That was all that mattered. "I can't take this," Elijah said. "Please. It would honor my son's memory, would honor the mercy you showed." Elijah took the box with shaking hands. They stood there at David's grave, an impossible gathering. Americans and Vietnamese, former enemies, connected by one man's choice to see humanity instead of sides. "This is what David wanted," Sarah said quietly. "This is what the protocol teaches. We're all just people, trying to survive, trying to do right. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is see that in each other." 6 months after that day, Elijah woke up in his house in Virginia and realized something had changed. He wasn't tired anymore, wasn't carrying the same weight. 57 years of guilt and hiding had finally lifted. He made coffee and walked outside. The sun was just rising. 14 veterans had come through the house in the last month. 4 were still there, healing slowly. His phone buzzed. A text from Crystal Hayes, Captain Hayes' daughter. She'd graduated high school and was applying to West Point. She wanted his advice. Another text from Marcus, who'd finally gotten his discharge upgraded and was starting community college. Another from Lieutenant Taylor Morrison, now teaching combat medicine and using Elijah's story in her training. The chain reaction continued. Lives touching lives. Choices creating possibilities. Peters pulled up in his car. He'd started visiting every Sunday. They'd have breakfast and talk about the protocol, the house, the work still ahead. "Morning," Peters said, climbing out. "Got news. The protocol is being adopted internationally. Canada, UK, Australia. They're all implementing their own versions." "David's reach was long," Elijah said. "No, your reach is long. David just made sure people could see it." They sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the world wake up. "You know what I realized," Elijah said. "I spent 57 years thinking I was broken. That what I did in Vietnam, the desertion, the violence, the running, made me less than. Made me someone who didn't deserve recognition. And now I realize I was never broken. I was just human, making impossible choices in impossible situations. And that's okay. That's actually more valuable than being perfect." Peter smiled. "That's exactly what the protocol teaches. Perfection isn't the goal. Humanity is." A car pulled up. Another veteran. Young woman this time. She looked lost, scared. Elijah stood. "I should go help her," he said. "You should. That's what you do now. Help people find their way home." Elijah walked toward the woman. She was crying. Couldn't get the words out. He just stood there, patient, until she could speak. "I heard about this place," she finally managed. "Heard there's someone here who understands, who won't judge, who just sees you." "There is," Elijah said. "Come inside, tell me your story." As he led her into the house, Peters watched from the porch. Watched this old man who'd spent most of his life invisible, finally fully visible. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, just as a human being who'd chosen over and over to see other human beings. The protocol continued spreading. The house continued filling. The work continued mattering. And Elijah Brooks, the shepherd, the deserter, the hero, the human, continued doing what he'd always done. Carrying people through hell until they could walk on their own. Because that's what respect looks like. That's what service means. That's what heroes do when no one's watching. They show up. They see people. They choose mercy over judgment. They choose humanity over protocol. And slowly, one person at a time, they change the world. Elijah Brooks understood that now, not because he'd been given a medal or recognition or even forgiveness, but because he'd finally learned to forgive himself, to see his own humanity the way David Wallace had always seen it, the way the 11 survivors saw it, the way every veteran who walked through his door saw it. He was just a man who'd made hard choices and lived with the consequences and refused, despite everything, to stop caring. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Ray Saye.